Alright, boys and girls, we're going to talk about a watercolor assignment today. And as we look at this example of a watercolor assignment, you may think to yourself, wow, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do a watercolor as detailed or as good as this. I'm here to tell you, yes, you can, and yes, you will, because we're going to take you through it step by step as we go through this entire process to make our watercolor. It's very easy. It is a step-by-step process. Now, as we think about watercolors and how to do watercolors, I think about your elementary. And when we think about doing watercolors in elementary, you probably remember the frustration of watercolor, because when you did watercolors, your paper probably kind of curled or wrinkled or even tore as you worked with it. And that's because that paper wasn't really designed for painting with water and watercolors. So our first thing that we need to make sure that we have is paper to work with. And so that's what this has. This is actual watercolor paper. You can kind of tell it's the good stuff because you can kind of see there is some texture in this paper. That texture is what's going to hold the paint and the water together as it works for your painting. And so paper is key, but it's not just only the paper. You're also going to need a board to work on. And all these things are up in the front. So here's the board that you're going to work from, and there's our paper. And I'll zoom up here just a little bit so you can see this. And so there's our board, and here's our paper. And so we will center our paper on our board just like that. But you need to make sure you have the paper and the board. Now, what the board's purpose is, the board, as we tape this to the board, it'll hold the paper in place. And that'll keep it from curling, wrinkling, any of that stuff. When it dries, it'll dry flat, which is really nice. And so those are the most important things with dealing with watercolors, are to make sure that you have watercolor paper. Now, getting back to this watercolor. When we think about this assignment, the main reason why we do this assignment in 7th grade art is because we're going to teach you a lot of different painting techniques. When we think about the different painting techniques, the first one we're going to teach you is called masking out. Masking out is where we're going to take tape and place tape where we don't want paint to go. Some of you maybe remember that when you were little, or at home, not little, maybe just at home, and you've helped your parents paint your room or help paint part of the house, and you've placed tape down, maybe like around a window, around the baseboard, or whatever, where you did not want paint to go. And that's the most basic form of masking out. We're going to use masking out a little bit more creative way. We're using masking out to create our artwork here. And as a matter of fact, we're going to use it to create these trees. If you look at this one, we have a brown tree here, we have a birch tree here, and then we have, like, it looks like a white pole. And actually, all this tree and this tree were white as this one when we peeled the tape off, because this tree was a tape tree, this tree was a tape tree, and this tree was a tape tree. Once you peel the tape off, it exposes the white paper, so the tape was set there because we didn't want any paint going there. We peel it off. Now we can paint that a color that we want to paint it. It'll either be a brown tree or a birch tree. It's up to you. But that's how we're going to use masking out. Okay? So today, what you'll need to do is come up to the front, and you're going to collect a board to work on. You're going to need your watercolor paper, and you will have either a thick roll of tape or a thin roll of tape. Okay? If you pick up a thick roll of tape, your partner will need to be a thin roll of tape. Your partner is going to be the person who sits next to you. Okay? So you need to make sure that if your partner picked up the thin roll, that you have a thick roll, because you're going to be sharing that. All right? So the first step is to tape your paper to your board. Now, you're going to do an arm's length of tape. You're going to pull this out, arm straight out, and you're going to pull this tape up to your nose. And you're going to keep that tape at the edge of your table, and you're going to hand that tape to your neighbor so that your neighbor can use it, and you move on and pass it back and forth as you need it. But we're going to tape a little bit of tape on the board and a lot on the paper. Let me zoom in on this just a tad so you can see what we're doing here. Okay? Now we'll get the other side. And again, we want to do a little bit of tape on the paper and a lot on the board. We don't want to waste that good watercolor paper with tape covering it. We want to cover it with this. Okay. Now if you have an area like I'm going to have right here that's not quite covered, just take a little extra piece of tape, a little piece, cover it. We want everything covered. Now we're going to go through and we're going to rub everything in with our fingers to make sure that we are sealed and put in there. Okay? Now once that's done, we're going to take down here at the bottom and we're going to put our name and today's date, 1-5-21, and then we're going to do whatever the period is, so period, whatever you're watching here, and then whatever your group is. Okay, period, whatever, and whatever your group is. And whatever today's date is, today that I'm doing this is 1-5. Okay? Then, when you think about your watercolor, you need to start thinking about your horizon line. That's where the ground meets the sky. How do you want your horizon line to look? We could look at that one. This is more of kind of a lump or a hump. This one's kind of more of a dip. Here's another different rolling type one, and yet another. So be thinking about what you want your horizon line to look. And you can actually even use your eraser to help you if you want. Say, I don't like that. I don't know about that one. But maybe something like that looks all right. Just draw it dark like that. Now, the requirement that you have to have for this is 1 thick tree and 2 thin trees. So when we say 1 thick tree, we're saying the thick roll of tape. 2 thin trees, obviously the thin roll of tape. So the thick tree, big thick piece of tape, we're going to set it here in place. We're going to tack it down. And what I mean by tack it down is we're just going to tack it here and tack it here. I'm not going to press it in. I'm just tacking it at the bottom and the top. Now I'm going to take my thin roll tape for my 2 thin trees. Now this is a minimum. You can do more. You can do more if you want. And then I'm going to do my 3rd tree. Okay. Now as I look at my taped trees, some things to think about. First off, some rules. The tops of these trees should all go off the top of your paper. That's number 1. They all got to go off the top. Okay? Number 2, they all have to go below this horizon line. If it's not below that horizon line, then it's going to be floating in the sky. Believe it or not, I've had students turn in a watercolor where the bottom of their tree's there at the pencil. It looks like it's floating in the sky. But we also have to make sure that the bottom of our watercolor, or bottom of our trees, are at 3 different levels. So we have a low, middle, and a high. Okay, a low, middle, and a high. Now it really doesn't matter what order your trees are. Here's a low, then this one's a medium, and this is a high. Here's another one where this was a low, this is a medium, and this is the high. It doesn't really matter the order, but you have to have a low, middle, and a high, because what we don't want to do is we don't want the bases at the same level, so when we bring a cast shadow across, that the cast shadow blends together, gets this big black mucky line going all the way across our watercolor. It doesn't look very good. So we need to make sure that we're at 3 different levels. I have a low, a medium, and a high. Okay, and that works out just fine. Now the other thing we have to worry about too, you guys, is the gap between our trees. This gap right here needs to be different than this gap right here, which also needs to be different than this gap right here, which also needs to be different than this gap right here. Okay? So you want to make sure and adjust the trees if necessary. Then you're going to grab your ID badge, and you're going to take your badge and you're going to press your tree in once you know that all that is good, just like this, because we want that tree to be stuck on that paper, because if it's not stuck on that paper, then we're going to be getting paint water seeping underneath of it. And we don't want that. We don't want anything to contaminate our trees. Now, every tree that you have out here needs to have branches and branches off of branches. So to do a branch, you just take some tape like this. We're going to start to rip this tape here. And then as we come off the tape, we want to rip to a nice point like this. Then when we take it and we place it on a tree like this, it goes from here to a nice fine point, right? So first off, the tree branch should never be thicker than the tree it's coming off of, right? Wouldn't this look weird if this was my branch right here? That branch is twice the size of the tree it's coming off of. It doesn't work. The other thing we want to make sure happens is that your tree ends in a point. It can't end in a stop because it would look like the tree got broke off. So you need to end in a point. Now every tree needs to have branches and then branches off of branches. So we're going to do this again to make a branch off of a branch. Like so. The branches don't have to be super long, but something like that would work. And so every tree needs branches and branches off of branches. We're going to take our guy here and put that on. And you know, the branches can go either direction. So if I take this and, sorry, rip that down. This one could go this way. All right. That. Okay. Do our big one. And it's going to go up like that. And maybe another branch coming up from that. Okay, so now I'll take my ID, press that in, and make sure that's all in. That's all you have to do. Now, like I said, 3 is a minimum. You could do more trees if you want to. You could put more branches. You could put branches on the other side. But this is a minimum that you have to have. 1 thick tree, 2 thin trees, branch and branch off a branch on all 3 of the trees, okay? Now, make sure, double check that you have your name down here, today's date, your period, and your group, okay? That is the first step to the watercolor. All of your supplies are up front, okay? Remember, you'll need paper, you'll need a board, one of the 2 of you, between you and a partner that you're sitting by, one of you will get the thick roll of tape, the other person will get the thin roll of tape, okay? All right, good luck.